Hello, everyone. Hello to all my fellow travelers. I'm Helen Taylor, and welcome to in the inspired radio series, You Are Supernatural. I'm here with you for conversations and stories to awaken something within us and to contribute to the creation of a new world. I'm creating heaven on earth, and I welcome you all to do it with me. Let's uncover the beautiful heaven that's awaiting all of us here on earth. It's just, unfortunately, at the moment, covered up by a whole heap of programming and illusions and all sorts of things. So let's get into it. Last week, that was series number 13, we kind of I finished off reading about my childhood. And if you all have a look back at your own childhoods, you'll see how you became something. You know, your parents, living with your parents and your siblings and your family, extended family, going to school and all those sorts of things form who you are. You become parts of everybody, really. If you honestly look back and have a look at who you were, the things that you did on a daily basis, the things you enjoyed, the things that you studied, your friends that you had, they all tell you stories about yourselves, little angles, little dimensions about yourselves. So today, I want to go into the next step of that. So by the time I was 13 years old, I was, pretty much fully formed as to who I was going to be for the rest of my life. The programs of mum and dad project into the future who we're going to be, which is why for generations, people became just new versions of their mum and dad. And worked in the same sort of industries, lived the same sorts of lives. Um, I think I even said last week that, or maybe it was a few sessions before that, I think, that I, had my first child. I got married this at the same age my mum got married. I had my first child at the same age that my mum had her first child. These programs run out again and again and again. And we just become images of the last generation. We do things a little bit differently and we think that we're changing the world, but we're just um, adapting the mold, I think, just changing the mold around a bit. Anyway, enough of that. I want to get into relationships today because I really think this is something that I've done a lot throughout my life. I've had to rethink relationships because I saw the relationships around me weren't working well or weren't successful. And what do I call successful? Well, watching people loving each other and supporting and encouraging each other and being happy with each other and the lives they're creating. And I didn't see a lot of that around me. So I had to start rethinking the relationships in my life. I've done it many, many times, which is why I'd encourage all of you to start having a little look at your own stories in your life, because the stories, when you look back on them, you start to see them from a few different angles. Like I just said when we started off here, have a look about where did you become like your father? Where did you become like your mother? Or did you have a favorite teacher and then you started becoming, similar to the behavior of your favorite teacher, right? We take on the characteristics of those around us and then we think that they're ours. There's nothing right or wrong about that. But when you start looking back at your own story with new eyes, with a bit more experience under your belt, you start to see it a little differently. And I can guarantee that by the time you were 13 years old, you were parts of significant people around you. You'd become them. You had their beliefs, their views of the world, their thinking in your head, all that sort of stuff. So take a look back and see how that was going for you, because then you start to see certain cycles in your life where you were trying to break free of those patterns, those programs as well. You know, we're born here as these authentic, incredible geniuses, and then we dumb ourselves down. I'm not saying that the rest of the world is dumb, right? But we limit ourselves by taking on the characteristics and behavior of people around us. We kind of get piled under all those personalities and we get lost in it. And we do have certain times in our life where we try to break free from something. And it's usually trying to break free from behaviors and mindsets of others or the world. I hope that made sense. Because when you start putting your experiences into words, it can come out a bit clunky at first when you're trying to, you know it in here, you know the experience, but to get it out into words, it can be a bit clunky at first. So I'm just kind of, I just wrote a couple of notes of things that were on my mind to talk about today, and I'm just starting to find the words to express them and get them out to you. It's good fun though. You've got to have a sense of humor about sharing things with the world. And I think having a good sense of humor then stops you getting too serious. And for me, it gets rid of the perfectionist, that mind program that wants everything to be perfect. Good luck with that one, because it just doesn't work. It doesn't work. So we really have to rethink our relationships. When you start to work on yourself, one of the things that really is dominant amongst all the different self-help realms, spiritual, or otherwise, is you're told that your relationships that are happening in your life can be karma, they can be past lives, that other people are mirrors of your own behavior. There's all sorts of things that go on. And I'm going to come back to that at the end of this, okay? I have a little note to myself. We're going to come back to that because there's something not quite right in that now. We're evolving all the time, and that's how we have looked at relationships, but that's changing as well. So I'll come back to that. So I'm going to start now with my book again and chapter 2, because chapter 2 is the relationships that shaped me. So I want to just start reading about, this is getting into high school and when we start, kind of interacting with the opposite sex and, thinking about boyfriends and girlfriends and all those sorts of things. So let's start chapter 2. I struggled with relationships. The significant relationships up until high school were with mum and dad, and of course, there were the holidays spent with my nan and pop. They were the only adults that I spent significant time with. With other adults, I would only get bits and pieces of their behaviour, so they didn't count. What I had figured out, though, was there was no intimacy or closeness in our family. Up until high school, I had learned from my mum that it was best to shut up and get on with it. From my dad, I learned that I would never amount to much. During primary school, I had 3 good friends, Deborah, Kathy, and Sandra. But of course, we weren't talking about insecurities and problems. Primary school was for learning and having fun. My Auntie Wynne was special to me. She was on my side. She was kind to me and filled with so much wisdom and was beautiful to be around. She showed me love and she gave me gifts from time to time. She helped me get my ears pierced when mum and dad wouldn't. She gave me my first pair of these lilac stockings and a crazy-looking witch flying around on a broomstick. It was a mobile toy that hung from the ceiling. She also gave me a fine gold chain with a cross on it. I loved it. I watched relationships at school, especially the ones between boys and girls. I was trying to figure out how they happened. I just didn't have a clue. Here was my problem. I couldn't work out how people moved from sitting next to each other and having a laugh to holding hands and being in a relationship. I became an intense observer and was frightened of any boy paying me attention and catching me out, like finding out that I really didn't know what to do. My insecurities were taking over, and it never occurred to me that one of these boys would be interested in me. I didn't even realize when one of them genuinely was interested in me. So when you look back at who you became up until that point, so I'm talking here about being 15 or 16 years old. Um, and up till then, I'd been told by dad that I wasn't worth much of anything and that I didn't have much to say. And that essentially, whenever I participated in anything, I just caused a lot of problems. So I was looking at life through those eyes. And as I said, I looked at the relationships around me, but they were limited relationships. So I was very naive and very insecure and looked at the world through those eyes. So the next part of this chapter is titled Darren. As a group, we would hang out together at someone's home. This is high school we're talking about. As a group, we would hang out together at someone's home. These were always during the day because I wasn't allowed out at night. I remember Darren James. He liked me and I liked him. We all went to the movies one day and he asked me if I wanted to go. I agreed. Was that a date? I had no idea because we were all going together. So it was a big group of us. So I just didn't know whether he'd asked me out on a date or not. We sat next to each other and he held my hand. Did I mention that the movie was The Exorcist? It was the scariest thing that I'd ever seen, and I'm sure I left my fingerprints embedded in his hand. Looking back, I think he was about as insecure as me. The problem was he never declared anything to me, but I did see the way he looked at me from time to time. I was never going to declare anything to him, just in case I was wrong. We got on really well, but it never became anything else. This leads me to a very funny story in the future that I must tell. Darren became a radio announcer on 3AW. I was a conveyancer at a law firm, and this is about 2018, I think. One of my clients came into the office to return some paperwork, and as she went to leave, she stopped me and asked, "Do you listen to Darren James on 3AW?" I told her I didn't. She said, "I was listening to his show the past weekend, and the theme was something to do with the first lost love. And Darren had spoken about his and said her name was Helen Taylor." She looked at me again and asked, "Are you that Helen Taylor?" I was amazed. Yes, I was that Helen Taylor. Fancy that. All these years later, to find out that I was his first lost love. If only one of us had been a little braver. This made me think about something else at the time. What greater power is there that arranges the coincidence of me having that particular conveyancing client at that particular time, that she listened religiously to 3AW and that she would relay the message? What makes little things like this happen? So back to my story. I missed the boat with Darren. Looking back, I think Dad's poison was at work again. You see, Darren and Michael C., who was his best mate, were two respectful boys. They were different from the other boys in our group. The others were the ones who got into smoking and bad behaviour that got them into trouble. They were the ones who used alcohol and experimented with sex. Darren and Michael didn't. Already, I was on the path of seeking out the bad boys. Next one is titled Andrew. Soon after I met Andrew, oh, sorry, I didn't say that with the right inflection. Soon after I met Andrew. He worked at the chemist in the shopping centre across from school. He would take me to the church across from the school on a Friday night. It opened up a space for young kids to come and meet. There was music and a really nice atmosphere and tables and chairs so you could sit down and chat. He was respectful, Christian, lovely and kind, and I didn't realise until a lot later in life he looked very much like the spirit guide I had when I was a child. He went to the tech school down the road and was working at the chemist to save up money to follow his dream of going to Antarctica and exploring. I really liked him and loved that he knew what he wanted and was going to make it happen. He had beautiful long dark hair and such a gentle way about him. He had all the time in the world for me and would always walk me home because it was dark. And he would kiss me on the cheek to say goodbye and tell me that he would see me soon. And he did. We met up a few times after that, and then he told me his dream was about to come true. He'd saved enough money and had booked his ticket on the boat to Antarctica. He walked me home one final time and kissed me goodbye. Andrew showed me how to have vision and to go after it. He inspired me, but I never saw him again. Look at these two boys. First two significant boys in my life. One of them had the same insecurities of me. Remember, I talked earlier about mirroring. Some people mirror back to you. He had the same insecurities as me, and he was as reluctant as me to express what he felt. So we were both at a bit of a stalemate, you know? Either I had to be brave and say something, or he had to be brave and say something. And asking me to go out was brave, absolutely. But my doubt of what that was all about became stronger than anything else, I think. But he was a nice boy and he became a very nice man, right? Who knows what the future could have been? But as I said, years later, somebody, let me know how Darren was feeling all those years ago. How he was feeling about me. It was just amazing. Have you ever thought about that? How those synchronicities or coincidences happen? They're just incredible, incredible. And then Andrew was just such a lovely young man, such a lovely boy. And he was kind to me and he was loving and he was considerate and all of those things. And both of those boys or young men came into my life for a short period of time and then were gone. Hmm. And then they were gone. Opportunities, right? Opportunities come along. And for whatever reason, we either sabotage them or get in the way. Just get in the way. When I look back on those two in particular, I had opportunities for good paths, I suppose, better paths, different paths than the ones I was going to take. And with Andrew, he did inspire me. He had a plan. And if anything, one of the mantras that I certainly have strongly these days is if you don't plan life, life will plan you. And what I mean by that is if you don't have something in mind for yourself, then life will do it for you by default. And I started to realize years later that default means by accident, mistakes, whatever you want to term them as. It really is, if things are happening at you and to you, it's because you're not in control. You're not choosing the life that you want. You're letting life dish up things to you instead. That's what I mean by default, right? You're either in charge of your reality and the things that you want and the goals that you have, or if you don't have them, and I can speak from experience because I didn't, I was at the mercy of life. I was just in the river of life and it was just banging me around, really, from shore to shore, from bank to bank. It was just, I suppose you think you're going with the flow, but it's not your flow. And I didn't know even back then that I had a choice. I didn't know that I had a choice. So, you know, Having said that, now I could have stepped up and done something about Darren. I could have stepped up and done something about even Andrew. I could have kept in contact with him. I could have met him when he finally came back. Who knows? But I was just being directed by life itself and the energy. And that meant that I was getting caught up in other people's projections of life. For moments in time, I was getting caught up in Darren's life and what he was about. And then because it didn't sustain itself, I moved on. He moved on. That's just how it happened. I met Andrew, and because it didn't sustain itself past that, he moved on and I moved on. So, what happened next? The next part is boys and alcohol. At 16, I was allowed to go to a party at the house of one of my friends. Everyone would be there. The rest of my friends had already been doing this on a regular basis. For me, this would be my first time at a party. So I was excited because I wasn't allowed out at night. I wasn't allowed to go to all these things. So here I was at 16, finally being allowed to go, or 17, it might have been. I got myself ready, put on a bit of makeup, collected some of my favourite record albums to take with me, and let Dad know I was ready to go. Immediately, he started at me with his poison. He told me I looked ridiculous with all my makeup and that I looked like a prostitute. He continued with his poison the whole way there in the car. I got out and I agreed with Dad that he would pick me up at 11 p.m. The party was great. Go back a step. Imagine that, right? My first party, all dressed up and ready to go. And all he did was undermine me the whole way there. Just bringing me down, bringing me down. What a great way to start. The party was great. Someone had brought along alcohol, and some of the boys made the girls a Bacardi and Coke each, and it tasted nice. The music started, and we were all dancing and sipping away at our drinks. Little did I know, but the boys thought it was really funny to keep topping up the drinks with Bacardi only. That meant that at some stage we were drinking something that was mostly Bacardi and very little Coke. We were getting very drunk. I had never been drunk before. As the night wore on and inhibitions were being thrown to the wind, couples were disappearing off into the bedrooms. I certainly threw caution to the wind and ended up in a bedroom with one of the boys. This was my first time with foreplay. Finally, it was good that he knew what he was doing because I was pretty awkward at first. It didn't matter, and it was actually nothing like I had imagined. It was pretty nice. We went back out to the party. Someone announced that my dad was outside in his car. Oh my God, I thought as I realized how drunk I was. How did I get this drunk? I could hardly walk properly. I gathered up my bag and the stack of records I'd brought along. I took a deep breath, stepped out the front door, and tried to walk properly to Dad's car. I couldn't. I stumbled and fell over. Records went everywhere. I got the silent treatment all the way home. The silent treatment was just as poisonous as his words. Neither Mum nor Dad believed my story about having only a couple of drinks. It wasn't until the next week at school that I found out how we got so drunk. The story of topping up our glasses was doing the rounds, and everyone thought it was hysterical. In Forms 5 and 6, which are years 11 and 12, there were many more parties and a few more encounters with foreplay, but I never actually had a boyfriend. Many times in my life, I would experience people projecting on me, people who thought they knew what I was thinking or what I was doing. Most of the time, they were wrong. I remember sitting around with my girlfriends one afternoon, and Sue decided to match a song title to each one of us. This is what I mean about projecting. She gave me, there was a song title, If You Can't Be With the One You Love, Love the One You With. It gave me insight into what she thought of me. I was so misunderstood. I was trying to figure it all out. Let me just reflect a little bit on that. She saw that I just, slept around. That's what she thought. And I wasn't actually sleeping around with anybody, right? I was just testing the waters and trying to figure out what these relationships were all about. But she just thought I was just being with anybody. It was at a big birthday party for Kyle's 18th. He was one of our group at school that I lost my virginity. Everyone was there, all my friends from school, Kyle's family and their friends. It was huge. I had a couple of drinks and remember looking around the room. I came upon a really nice looking guy. He was a friend of Kyle's that I'd never met before. I decided that I was going to lose my virginity that night and it was going to be with him. I zoned in on him and I made it happen. It was done, and I still remember thinking the strangest thing. It wasn't painful and there was no bleeding. I hate to be so direct here at the moment, but it's important because that's what all my girlfriends spoke of. So, why didn't it happen to me? Just a little insight that I was getting. Okay. And we're not going to get any further into that today. Um, I just want to leave it at that, right? I mean, actually, that was probably one of the most significant choices I made for myself. As soon as I decided it's time to get this virginity stuff out of the way, I just zoned in on someone. He wasn't related to all the boys that I went to school with and everything. I think I just wanted someone outside of that circle, and I honed in and I made it happen. I made it happen. And then, of course, realized that my personal experience didn't relate to the same experiences that my girlfriends were having, and something wasn't quite right there. But we'll get into that later up in the book. So, relationships, right? We really have to rethink our relationships. Those three little parts of that chapter that I've read out are starting to show you how I was starting to form my own view of relationships in the world. Watching everybody else, then starting to test the waters, starting to have some experiences, and then diving in, right? Big time to, I've got to really test this out and see what it's all about. Relationships. Hmm? Essentially, really, the greatest relationship is the one that you have with yourself. And I didn't realize back then that, all of those little insights I was getting along the way was, me starting to cultivate my internal world. And I also saw how I was operating as very naive, but actually I was looking at things with new eyes. I was actually investigating and researching relationships more than anybody around me were. They were caught up in their own programs of what relationships were all about. And most of them were all doing the same thing. Me, I was standing back on the edge watching, dipping my toe in the water a little bit and then watching again, and dipping my toe in a little bit and watching again. I was trying to figure out why they were all doing what they were doing and why it was all so important. That's another thing. I didn't realize why having a relationship with somebody was so important to so many people. I was really quite happy with Andrew and just getting a kiss on the cheek and getting walked home and sitting with him at that cafe and having good conversations. I loved it. So that's this week's episode, relationships. Are you looking at the relationships you have with people around you and maybe rethinking them? How are they working for you? Are they on an equal footing? Would you like something more out of it? Because let me finish up with this. Do you know what the RAS is? The reticulating activation system. It's a reticulating activation system. You can Google it, you can look it up. It's part of our brain, and it's a part of our brain that is wired to find in your environment whatever you're focusing on. Whatever you're focusing on, if you want a relationship with good, kind, loving people, and you keep thinking about that, your RAS will actually start finding people in your environment that match your thinking. Let me give you an example of how it works. Have you ever thought about buying a car? You want to buy a car or you want to buy an object of some sort, and you start thinking about that car or that object. And then next thing you get out in the world and you start seeing that car or that object again and again and again and again. That's the RAS at work. It finds in your environment people and things that you have focus on. Isn't that crazy? And it finds them for you, people and things. It's an amazing part of our brain, our wiring. So, depending on what our focus is and what we're really thinking about all the time, we actually, we start to see it in our environment. How does that relate to relationships? Well, you'll see more when I start getting into the next level of the relationships that I got into, because my whole thinking started to get, kind of more negative. My self-worth stuff that was embedded with dad started to come to the surface, and it started to turn up in the relationships I started to attract after that, because the first few relationships were really nice, really nice. So join me next week as we go a little deeper into, how we start to get into the adult world and the adult life, and how our programming from childhood starts to, imprint on those people we're attracting. And if we're unconscious and the subconscious is working, we're not aware of it. I didn't know I was doing it. I didn't know I was playing a part in it. But join me next week as we go into that level of relationships. And in the meantime, all my love to you.